Hello, John. Thank you for coming back to the show. We talked on our episode 24, or part 24, I should say, 2 weeks ago that we were going to do a call-in. So we've set up spaces, X spaces. So the individuals that are listening to the show, please just signal that you would like to ask a question, and we'll put you on, and John will answer. Hopefully, you're respectful, and please just keep in mind, let's keep this highbrow. Okay, John, thank you for coming on the show. I just want to remind everybody that's watching and listening that click the link of the videos, all the videos that I have done with John. That link will take you to his website, and that website you can sign up for his periodical, and you can also sign up for a reading. We will talk about that throughout this broadcast, but please click the link in the description of my videos with John, and that will take you to his website so you can purchase his periodical and do a reading, especially with the year ending. Doing a reading at year end is kind of a cool thing to do. So, John, thank you very much for coming back to the show here. Where do you want to start? There's a lot that has gone on.
So much has happened in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Very history-changing things. For one thing, since the 17th of November and up to the 27th of November, my long concern foreboding that I've written about for years, that in fact I wrote about it before the Ukrainian conflict began in 2021, there was a likely chance that we would see something like a Cuban Missile Crisis moment 13 days in October 1962 that would transpire with the war in Ukraine, which I said I would call it the Ukrainian Missile Crisis, and that it would be orders of magnitude far more dangerous than anything that happened in 1962, which I witnessed when I was in my final 13 days in October of being 6-year-old, turning 7 on the 29th of October 1962, which was the ending of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and also the most dangerous day, we later found out, because of incidents happening with the U.S. Navy and a Soviet submarine that they were trying to keep underwater until its batteries would die out, forcing them to surface. And all these Soviet crewmen and their officers are down there, and they've got a U.S. fleet above them. They don't know what's going to happen if they surface. So finally, getting a little too carbon monoxide poisoned, the commander of the Soviet submarine said, "Oh hell, let's just fire a nuclear torpedo at them, and take care of them." And his second, the commissar and the second officer said, "No, I don't think that'd be a good idea." And so, even though everything was resolved in the Cuban Missile Crisis, that incident that happened between the 28th and 29th, the Sunday and Monday of the Cuban Missile Crisis, could have very easily started the war. They did surface. Navy jets strafed at them, but they could quickly see that even though it was light and they were blazing lights on them, the guys on the conning tower of the Soviet sub could see that they were firing ahead of them, not on them. But if they had misjudged that, they might have launched that torpedo, sending off a tactical nuclear weapon, maybe a Hiroshima-sized bomb that might have taken out a few U.S. naval ships, and there we are. So we missed that, fortunately. But on the 17th of November, President Joe Biden did something which I unfortunately kept predicting he would repeat. And it was throughout this entire conflict, he always, not only is he doing it, Olaf Scholz and many other leaders who are invested in fighting a NATO proxy war with the Russian Federation, using Ukraine as the whipping boy of war, had would always say, like Schultz would say, "Oh no, we won't send." The Americans would say, "We're not going to send them weapons, so we're not going to even send them helmets." And then later they do. "Oh no, we're not going to send them guns, artillery pieces," and then they do. "Oh, we're not going to send them missiles that they can fire deep into Russia," and then we do it. Um, but for a long, long time, Biden used to say, "Well, here's the deal: if we do that, if we send ATACMS missiles into the Russians, that's World War III." He famously said that in March of 2022, when the war started. So here he is on the 17th of November down in Brazil, doing a press conference where he never mentioned what he was going to do, but he ended up wandering off into the jungles for after that. But sometime on that day, he had, and he had done it, and it wasn't done through Blinken and Sullivan, who his NSA chief and his Secretary of State, Blinken, uh, who seemed to be running the show, running the president's office for him because he's just declining so fast. But apparently, what I've come to understand, and I'm actually completing my next Hogue Prophecy emergency report, which should be out in a few days. So it's now 10 articles, 30,000 words, lots of information about what is going on, not just in this bullet we dodged, this nuclear bullet we dodged from the 17th of November, 8 days later, ending on the 27th or 26th of November or 27th of November, which were the 8 days of November, not the 13 days of October 1962, but the 8 days of the Ukrainian missile crisis, which began on the 17th with Biden ordering up a, a permission where he denied the permission in September. He opened up permission for ATACMS missiles to be fired deep into Russian territory, undisputed motherland Russian territory, the borders before 2014. This is literally, with all the warnings that the Russians had given them, that, including President Putin, say, if you do this, the Ukrainians aren't firing these missiles into our country. You are. They're just pushing the buttons. We give them the coordinates. And because this is our secret technology, we don't let mere Ukrainians know how to make it and do it themselves. We guide these things with our satellite telemetry. We choose the targets to hit. So it's entirely an American attack on the Russian Federation. I mean, how would you feel if it was on the shoe was on the other foot? How would you feel if Russia had bases in Mexico and they were fighting a war where the Mexicans were kind of launching US missiles, Russian missiles, that is, that were guided completely by Russian telemetry in bunkers in Mexico, hitting the United States? Would you just sit back and go, "Oh, that's okay"? No. And why should you think the Russians, especially since the Russians have been attacked a lot more than we have by foreign nations, losing tens of millions of people over their history? The last one recently enough in history was in 1941 to 1945, where 3 million men of the German Wehrmacht and air forces invaded the Soviet Union, with a lot of allied European forces in the Axis alliance with them, the Italians, the Romanians, the Slovaks, and also among them contingents in the SS from every European nation, including the Spanish Blue Division, fascist Spain. So once again, like Napoleon, all marching in, trying to break up the Russian people and grab their resources. And they lost 27.5 million people in 3 years, beating this Axis force and eventually throwing them all the way back to Berlin in utter destruction. So they still hurt from that. There's not a single family in across Russia's 11 time zones that hasn't lost in that war alone a lot of relatives. So, so, we seem to be removed from that as we have been removed from the pain and suffering of our own civil war that took place in the 1860s. But Russians don't forget their history. We unfortunately don't even don't even first get to know it before doing things, especially our leaders. So, so this situation um, was an immediate red line crossed. And so what then happened was there was tit for tat things that went on. The first, there were 5 ATACMS that were fired. Biden said they were going to be hitting Kursk region of Russia, but they ended up hitting Bryansk. Problem with Americans, they're not very good with maps too. They hit Bryansk instead. 6 missiles were fired on a ammunition dump, and the S-400 Russian anti-missile systems shot down 5 of them, and a Pantsir Gatling gun hit the last one coming in, which broke up over the arsenal and did cause some fires in the arsenal, but they were put out. So that was the first escalation. Then the next thing that happened was an escalation of British Storm Shadows. These are cruise missiles being launched at in Kursk at a battalion HQ. Now, here's the thing: there are only about 50 ATACMS left in everything that we've sent them, and the British only have about 100 Storm Shadows left. So on the next day of it, the British launched at least 12 Storm Shadows with an American ATACMS chased in to this one HQ. The thing that's kind of been speculated by some of my sources, like Alexander Mercouris on the Duran, very good show to watch online. I highly recommend it. Is that perhaps the there were see the Ministry of Defense likes to visit up front a lot and often what's going on in the war, Belousov. And they thought that him and Lankin, the commander of Army Groups North of the Russian front, near the Kursk region, might have been there up in a forward battalion HQ watching what was going on the front. That was maybe the SBU, the Intelligence Service of Ukraine, thought they had happened there. Apparently, they were not there. But it seems odd that they would expel 12 of their 100 remaining Storm Shadows and 1 ATACMS at one system here. So that went on. And then the Russians then said they were going to do something. And let's see, I think that was the last attempt. There might have been another blast of missiles. I can't quite recall at the moment. But what then happened is the Russians responded on the 21st, and Putin announced that he was going to launch a whole different new system that had never been seen before as a retaliation. It was launched near Astrakhan. It was hypersonic. Those shots that showed it in the sky with the flaring of exhaust, that probably was taken from watching one of Elon Musk's rockets rising. That's why some people thought maybe that Russians had fired a hypersonic glide wing. But it was a single stage ballistic missile called the Oreshnik. Oreshnik means a hazel in Russian. And the Oreshnik then was aimed at Dnipro, as what the Ukrainians call Dnipropetrovsk, the city right where the Ukraine kind of curls, right when the Dnieper curls around this major city that's in the center of Ukraine. It has a very large, I think, 1 square mile, or no, 5 square mile installation. It is called Yuzhmash. It is a huge industrial complex in the center of Dnipro that has underground reinforced staging areas, maintenance areas for building missiles. So if many of you have probably seen the pictures, especially on X already over the last month. But what came in was you see the city on the CCTV cameras around town. You see the city with it's cold, there's a little snow falling, and the ceiling of the cloud layer is about 2,000 meters. You suddenly see a light glowing the whole sky above the clouds, and then you see these six at a time, these six um, plasma lines of fire. These are not retro rockets. These are literally these instruments coming in at Mach 10, uh, hypersonic, just into the hypersonic range, Mach 10, and they're hitting the Uzhmash thing like whoop, 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 just like that 6 times. What they did is released each of the six released a subunit, a submunition of possibly hard alloy, special alloy metal warheads. This was a kinetic weapon. It was fired like a nuclear regional ballistic missile. It wasn't a continental ballistic missile, as some people have said. It was regional ballistic. It went from 500 miles and it crossed that in less than 6 minutes from Astrakhan, way off in the Caspian Sea, all the way into central Ukraine. Um, and there wasn't much fire or explosion when these things hit. Although I also, in this Hogue prophecy report I'm going to release, you're going to see the movie and you're also going to hear the explosions, which were thunderous. I've never heard such deep roaring thunder from these kinetic bombs. And you will see them sprinkling all over the Uzhmash system factories, but there's not a lot of fire from them. Now, it I think what's happened is that Putin and the Russians wanted to just give a demonstration of what this thing could do if it had been armed with um, a special alloyed hexyl, I think it's called, metallurgical stuff. That what you want to do in a kinetic warhead is you get this very dense metal that can resist the hypersonic plasma racing. And I mean, the CCTV cameras were whiting out because they just were. I mean, if you were there watching these with your own eyes, they'd probably sear your eyes, the brightness of these things, just like mini nuclear explosions, you know. But it's not nuclear, it's not radioactive. It has none of the things that make nuclear weapons so terrible. But it can have the destruction capability. And rather than absolutely destroy the Uzhmash installation, they just drilled a bunch of holes in it to show that they could do it. And then when Putin announced later that day that they had used a new weapon, that is a whole new order of weapon, you know, the whole thing in this whole Ukrainian missile crisis thing is that it's very easy. You know, you launch a few little missiles like the Americans did and the British, and then the Russians might launch a few Kinjal hypersonic missiles, and then maybe it's another escalation. And then what you have is the idea is, well, the Russians won't keep going because the next step is nuclear. Well, they didn't have to go nuclear. They have weapons, not just this one, but they have advanced weapons like the glide vehicle I was saying, and other things that can also be kinetic. So they are actually conventional weapons with the same potential damaging effect without radiation and fallout that can happen. So if I think they just sent just some metal dummies into the thing. That's why it didn't explode. They didn't really damage the Uzhmash uh, area much. But if they had used the hexyl alloyed warheads, which are just a metal warhead, no explosives, And then if they would have come in a little slower, because if you go too hypersonic, the impact is not as deep. The Kinjal slows into high subsonic distance before it hits anything. That's why it was able to dig 400 feet into the earth around Ukraine, wiping out entire headquarters where NATO had officers and soldiers guiding missiles and things, American and British and French missiles, and they just dug right in there and destroyed everybody. It's at least happened twice that I know of. With a lot of people getting notices that somebody died in accident in Brussels or something like that, which no, they were wiped out in Ukraine where they're not supposed to be. So what then happened? So what would have happened if the Uzmash had the hexyl alloy warheads? It would have drilled very clean holes in an instant, like into the roof, and then it would have penetrated 4 or 5 floors at a temperature of 3,000 Celsius or something. I think it's 3,000 Celsius, 5,000 degrees, where cement melts, evaporates, metal evaporates. All they would have found in those deep holes is dust if it had done what it could have done. And there wouldn't be any parts. This is so fast and hard that the kinetic energy just breaks up the molecular structures of things and just leaves dust. Because this is the heat. This is near the heat of the surface of the sun. So it has almost a nuclear heat like a nuclear detonation, but it's not nuclear. It's simply the impact of some dense object going at a very high speed that at a certain point it's going so high. I mean, it's why a small meteor can leave a whole valley, in Arizona, a little crater, a huge crater valley, just from a little meteor, because of the speed in which it's hitting upon the Earth as the Earth is moving very fast through the space. So if it's coming this way and the Earth is coming that way, the combined energy of the impact of the speed of the meteor with the speed of the Earth, which is going, 12 miles a second or something like that through space, it makes a huge collision, a huge crater. The thing Manhattan, the thing that killed the dinosaurs was the size of Manhattan Island. Uh, Not a greatly large island, but coming in at hypersonic speeds, incredible speeds, hitting the Earth, it made a crater the size of the Yucatan Peninsula. So long ago, 20 years ago, I started writing about, and it'll be in my book of things to come, of how what could happen is that we do eventually get rid of all the nuclear weapons. But the next generation of things is now already here. That was only kind of theorizing. The Russians are also starting to look at other ways to use weapons that are not nuclear, but can do a lot of damage to invaders and people firing missiles into their territory. This shocked a lot of people across the world, a lot of militaries, a lot of governments. And it was like finally saying, we keep warning you that we're going to do something. Well, we just did it. And we have, because this is not a hypersonic missile, and it's kind of based on another missile that they almost made. But, the INF treaty was created, which prevented that system to be made. But then when Donald Trump erased the INF treaty in 2018 in his 1.0 presidency, he basically ended what many American presidents has done in the 21st century, uh, dismantling all of our ability to keep deterrence and end a nuclear conflict. And so the Americans, and it was only the Americans doing it, started one by one getting out of the IBM treaty, other treaties, and basically we're stripping the world bare of treaties that would prevent World War III being nuclear. So this Oreshnik would not exist, and Putin pointed this out, would not have had to exist if we kept these treaties. But when Trump just bugged out of the anti-missile medium range missile treaty, he the Russians said, we will still honor the treaty. We will not crowd like happened in the late 80s with the Pershing 2 and 3 missiles versus the SS-20 missiles of the Russians, the Soviets. Put literally 1,500 missiles with such a rapid fire that if there was a mistake or a training session or something, you wouldn't know because you have no time to decide. If the missiles are launching from one side, then your intermediate range missiles launch. And you both launch thousands of nuclear explosions across Europe, and then maybe 10 minutes later, the ICBMs of Russia and America are bullying each other up. We were so close to doing that. In fact, if this treaty hadn't happened, it was inevitable that within a few years, some mistake or something would have happened, and we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. We would probably have some pre-industrial survivor, a few survivors. There wouldn't be no Zoom, there would be no computers or anything like that. We would be in a devastated world. Um, it didn't happen because those treaties were there. And it also hasn't happened because the Russians, who are adults, not the leaders in the United States, sadly to say, at least the ones that are currently in this dying administration of lame duckness, um, the 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 Russians understand they're dealing with people on our side that have forgotten the Cold War, that have for he knows he's dealing with people that believe they can win a nuclear war. So Russian restraint is a reflection of how far gone our leaders have gone to your peril, all of our peril. They don't understand that this is a deterrent not to be used. So, but Russia was forced to uh, get out of its change its nuclear doctrine to match the United States doctrine. That was another threat before they used the Oreshnik to make the point. Um, so, because now their new doctrine is that if any non-nuclear nation should have fired from its environs a conventional missile deep into our country from another nuclear power, then we reserve the right to nuclear attack that non-nuclear country and its source. So the Russians were ready, and they were pointing out that this escalates to the next escalation. We are ready to fire a missile into a British airbase or right into the Storm Shadow factory in London and make our point that, and they might fire the same thing into America to make their point, because a lot of the leaders in America, they'll openly comment, says, oh, well, that'll just hit Europe. That'll be a shame. They literally don't believe that the Russians will fire on the United States. Well, you are firing on Russia. Guess what? We didn't go there because someday you'll thank the Russian people and their sober government for not being the nut jobs that the mainstream news keeps making them out. They are merely projecting about what our leaders have been doing to them and ultimately to you. So, what was the response of the Oreshnik? The Allies, Britain, France, and who are now putting their missiles in, and America thought, we're going to escalate again. So they did. Around the 24th through the 26th of November, they tried to launch missiles, but the Russians had found the HIMARS missile launchers. So they destroyed, I think, 8 HIMAR missile launchers in 2 days. And suddenly there were no more missiles fired because I think they destroyed all the HIMAR missile launchers. You can only launch one large ATACMS at a time off the HIMAR frame that's built for them. I mean, they can replace those with smaller missiles, can do multiple fires, but the ATACMS is a large ballistic missile. And so they have to remove, so they only had those kind of launchers, and they were all destroyed in 2 days. Not only were they destroyed, but their crews, one was a mixed group of Ukrainians and CIA, and about 50 of them were obliterated with their machines, and another 40 or 50 were also obliterated. And most of them were Americans, either CIA contract soldiers or CIA that were manning them with a few token Ukrainians around to be obliterated with them. So what then happened is the following day on the 27th, Joint Chiefs of Staff commander of the Armed Forces of the United States, General Brown, received a phone call. He picked it up, and the phone call was from the chief of the Russian armed forces, General Valery Gerasimov. Now, that is a very unusual. Gerasimov never does that. So he's got the commander of Russian forces on the phone with the commander of American forces. And he made it quite clear on the 27th that we know what you're doing. We're starting to hunt your people. So, we know, that they're there, and we know they're there because we just killed a bunch of them. And we mean business. We have a lot of these Oreshniks missiles, and if you launch again, we will hit targets in Britain and the United States and Europe with our demonstrations. So, message was received, and phone hung up on that 27th of November, on the 8th and final day of the Ukrainian missile crisis. It ended. The allies of the West put a pause upon it. And we're all alive because people in the West, and it's often been, I've said this many times throughout this conflict, that we are also alive, not just because of Russian restraint, but there are people in the Pentagon, commanders in the Pentagon, who know these choices that the politicians are making could very easily lead to a nuclear escalation. And they have been trying, a thin line of the brass have been trying to hose down the overexcited politicians and bring caution to them. Gerasimov helped that happen by literally directly calling his opposite in the United States. So, and notice, since the 27th of November, no missiles. No missiles are fired. No missiles have been launched from the storm shadows of England, either of Britain. These would have to be launched from air. And do you notice we're not hearing any more word about the F-16, the US F-16s that were sent, like 12 to Ukraine? Maybe they've been all obliterated too. There have been a lot of very heavy attacks on Ukrainian airfields of late. So we dodged a bullet, everybody. We had our Cuban Missile Crisis moment, and we mostly didn't even know it was happening. I mean, unless you're watching Paul Cottrell or other members of the alternative media, you won't get that other take. Now, you don't have to believe us. Don't blindly believe anyone. I don't ask you to believe me, but if you're interested in knowing my sources, you join my Hogue Prophecy report. I share all my sources and very much would encourage you to discover the alternative media sources and their sources and their sources. And then you will finally start getting an idea. So I contend, prove me wrong. Prove me wrong over time, because my sources, I didn't just grab these sources. Some of my sources are decades that I've had them. They have a track record. That's how you develop good sources over time. And you will find a whole lot of amazing people that are out there um, that are really are becoming the new mainstream news. I wouldn't say that until since the election ended, because clearly the what I see this is a good thing to see is Americans are waking up. Even Americans who didn't vote for Trump, as well as the ones who did, are waking up to the fact that the mainstream media is lying, telling half stories, uh, adverse to giving sources, which means they don't really have good sources. And and this is such an important change that people are getting hep about that. They're getting awakening from that, because with the way prophecy works, the prophets that talk about the Third World War have have one thing shared in common. It's that the people that end up stumbling into World War III were not informed that it was even at their doorstep. They literally one day when the flashes started, the city started melting and they were all dead, not knowing why or who pushed a button, because your news will, rather than talk about President Putin as a human being, they talk about him as if he's Dobby, an evil house elf. They talk to you like children. They talk to you like children, and you're not children. And fortunately, people started to get hip about that, get awakened about that. And I think that is something that's very interesting that is happening now since November 5th. I think November 5th's election has has literally begun what I've long been saying was a hopeful thing that could happen in the second half of the roaring 2020s, that we're survived the first half. By New Year's, we'll have been through the first half, which had its many dangerous moments that were misinforming us about our press. I mean, why would someone? Ah,
No, let me just interject. We have some people in X spaces right now. I
yeah,
just remind everybody that if you would like to ask a question, just raise your hand and I'll let you on and you can ask a question to John.
yes, I'd
So
love it.
don't be shy. There's no reason to be
I
shy.
don't bite.
But the whole idea here is that further recordings and live streams that we do, we're trying to have a more interactive participation with the audience. So don't be afraid, don't be shy. If you'd like to ask a question, please do. Go ahead, John. Continue.
So the there's a change happening um, in the 2010s. There was a lot of aspects in astrology and political astrology that were really explaining a lot of the kind of the irresistible force of protests, like Occupy Wall Street, hitting an immovable object called the establishment, that was caused by, I won't get into this astrobabble, but too much, but it was caused by Saturn and Uranus being in oppositions during the 2010s and then in squares in the end of the 2010s into the 2020s. But then, and then also Uranus moving into Taurus into its fall, which, given that the Uranus is the ruler of the Aquarian age, the age of humanitarian science, communication, being in its fall means it's in the least favorite place to be in the zodiac, which means it's literally, in layman's terms, during the opening years of the 2020s, it has been used to, its revolutionary potentials have been used to revolutionize deep state censorship. revolutionize the media to be more misinformed, to revolutionize to not be for the humanitarian urges of Aquarius, but to actually take them away with certain experiments with certain issues of diseases that shut down the world, to see if the human race is if the globalists and the human race can see if they can control us. That square is ending soon. And then what is going to happen is an opening, is a feeling, no matter what your political persuasions are, is that you just get sick and tired of the way things have been going. And you just time to reform things, time to bring some people outside of the deep state, like Elon Musk, the Doge movement that they're doing, and literally do what every president has had the power to do, but none of the presidents during the 20th century and this century have used it. It's always been the executive branch has the power to hire and fire anyone who's not doing their job, not, or is an unelected official who is deciding what the voters choosing their elected officials should decide. These professional career people, or these people that end up being watchmen against the medical industry, who then end up, after they've been in government, being hired by the medical industry. That will end. That's corruption. It'd be like, anyway, that's corruption. The so what's happening now is that if we get it to 20th of January, and I think we will, there have been a lot of times during the last, well, since 2022, where I have seen a very dark force of unconsciousness overtaking the human race, and that could very well see us walk with our eyes wide shut into a thermonuclear phase of World War III. We have been in World War III since 2022, February. Uh, and now I'm seeing, after years, people starting to come around to the fact that it's not a Cold War anymore. The second Cold War started in 2014 because of the Americans aiding and abetting neo-Nazis in Ukraine to overtake the democratically elected Yanukovych government in the Maidan coup. Uh, and that's where the Cold War started to speed up towards going hot in 2022, when the Russians, after being provoked again and again by NATO and Ukraine, preempted Ukraine's offensive against the Russian-speaking populations that were being persecuted and killed by their own government, by Nordic rune tattooed people of a persuasion that used to be very popular when a certain Austrian was running Germany in the 1930s and 40s. The fact that I have to speak like that shows to what extent we have to be careful. We have to be like Nostradamus, writing nebulous verses so that the Roman Inquisition in the 1550s wouldn't burn him at the stake. Some things have not changed much since then. So I try to, what has really been a great help to alter this media has been Elon Musk buying for $44 billion Twitter and turning it into X. It is, ironically, a billion. It took a billionaire. I've often said this would happen, that the people, the masses in the world, are never going to be able to throw their overlords off. We, the overwhelmed, cannot do it unless some of that elite, some of that 1% aristocratic, bureaucratic people have a come to Jesus moment and move their wealth and their influence to help the people. And I started writing about this in 2008, that you had to find oligarchs that saw the light and started to rebel against the status quo of the aristocracy of corporate people of our time, just like people like Marquis de Lafayette in the French aristocracy joined up with George Washington and the American rebels and others. Um, the we need the help of, it doesn't need many. Ironically, President-elect Trump is one of these people too. He's freaking out his own class because he is rebellious. He's also trying, in his very odd ways and unpredictable ways, is trying to get there. It's not a surprise to me that he is surrounding himself with people like Bobby Kennedy and Elon Musk, and hopefully, because his greatest strength and his greatest weakness is that he's a wide open channel. He channels whoever's in front of him. If he can channel people like Elon Musk and Tucker Carlson and others, rather than Mike Pompeo or the walrus fellow, John Bolton, neocons, um, he'll channel the right thing. Um, and so here we are with Trump as a catalyst. Whether you love him or hate him, what is about to happen in the next 5 years is something that has been predicted by a lot of interesting American seers going back into the 1800s. Like David Goodman Crowley in 1888 wrote some remarkable prophecies about the United States, very accurate. Or Orson Pratt of the Mormons, he also foresaw that there would be a second civil war or a second revolution. Catherine, Irene F. Hughes, a clairvoyant from Chicago in the 1960s, which was very famous, very accurate in her forecasts. She wrote that in far off mid 2020s, there would be a second American Revolution started after the middle of the 2020s. And it wasn't clear if it was violent or not, but it felt to me that it was more like what I've been saying since I started talking about the danger of the 1990s, of the 2020s and the 1990s, about the Civil War and a second American Revolution. I've always been hoping it would be a peaceful, reforming, restoration of the constitutional rights kind of revolution. And there's now I'm finally seeing in activity the potentials in our times of that happening in the next during the next 4 years of the Trump administration. It'll get its launch. And it'll be ultimately trying um, to flush out of the people's government, the government of, by, and for the people, this deep state of people that are not they're not there for us. They think the government is theirs, and they're our overlords, and they want to keep us overwhelmed. But I'm seeing more and more people starting to wake up to the fact that they've got to clear this stuff out of our system. And one of the best ways is to just go through, as Doge will do, and take out perhaps as much as two of the trillion of the 6 trillion we spend each year, and most of it wastefully in our government. Um, so this has always been the ability of the president to do. He doesn't need congressional support. He runs, the employees of the United States government are his employees, whoever the president is. So somebody just said to Trump, look, they've never done it, the presidents, but you have the power to choose people to go in and do a clear out, do an efficiency examination, do an audit of people's skills as well as how they're using the money, and just take them out. I mean, one of the things that could happen is that Trump has this very interesting idea. He's going to decentralize agencies dwelling inside the Washington swamp. He's moving agencies to other states. With internet, you don't have to be all in the swamp of Washington. He's going to scatter them all over the country. And, with computer technology and all, you're that far away in time from any interaction with any of the agencies. So they're going to be downsized, they're going to be scattered around the country, and Trump's saying, I'm going to put them in states where people have more of an awareness of their constitutional responsibilities. uh, that I agree with, because there are some states that have kind of lost their way with the Constitution, and there are others that are remain constitutional. And it's not a question of whether it's good or bad. It's a question, as Buddha used to say, the truth is that which works. And, if so, decentralizing, they're going to physically decentralize Washington, take a lot of that out. There's another thing that's happened, which Trump did by signing off on his transition by um, saying that we will privately not use I don't know what the agencies call, or this agency of the government where you sign off on them kind of having a part in deciding. This would be the bureaucrats deciding what will be transition. Well, Trump's people signed off on it in a way that they're responsible. They are going to, and that's also legally possible. So they literally cut out all the people and the bureaucrats who could come in and say, "Oh well, no, don't let them do that. Oh well, we'll just say we did it when we didn't do it." And then all those people over time are going to be being reviewed, and to find out who has been doing stuff like that. I mean, and he's got the Supreme Court on his side with this, because the one biggest beef the Supreme Court, both sides, has had is that the the is concerned the court much that people who have not been voted into office have decided to control and do the things of our Congress and our president and our Supreme Court, who are not whom we voted to do it, to write bills. All those bureaucrats that write bills according to what they want to do is often happening. And so the people are not to serve these bureaucrats. These bureaucrats should serve us, and they should be afraid of us. They should be looking over their shoulder, looking over whether they're going to be fired for actually doing something that's a bit treasonous. The Constitution, the Constitution begins with the important statement, "We the people of the United States of America." This government is yours, not the bureaucrats. This government is to be governed by those people whom you vote for to go and govern it, not the lifer bureaucrats. So these are the things that I think are going to, with a lot of the chaos of the Trump administration. I mean, it's a mix. I'm writing some essays, which you'll be reading in my newest Hogue Prophecy report that's coming up in a few days, where I talk about how Donald Trump is forming a cabinet, which reminds me very much like the American Apprentice, the Celebrity Apprentice show. Uh, if you remember watching that show, yes, there will be some people that will play Omarosa, and there will who kind of screws things up and sabotage things. There will be people there that do that, and then the talent will be challenged by that. The Tulsi Gabbards and Bobby Kennedys will be challenged by the Sebastian Gorkas that are also in Trump's cabinet. And he's a Gemini. He does this. He challenges stuff. It's very social, and it's in fact, he even called his own version of X Truth Social. He's a social animal, so he likes to interact with the good, the bad, the ugly, the way they pit off each other. And you know, Mario Rubio may think he's the Secretary of State, but the difference with this situation is Trump is the boss. And in America, in Celebrity Apprentice, this is Celebrity Apprentice cabinet show of the next 4 years is going to also have "you're fired," "you're hired," going on, a lot of it. So I don't know if unless Mario gets the point that Trump is now more experienced, he's showing that he's learned from his mistakes, and actually his silence during all this missile crisis. A lot of people were yelling, why is Trump silent? Why is he silent? A lot of it was going on across the alternative media. And I have a couple articles about that with some very good insights from Alexander Mercouris and Scott Ritter, and I mean, who had two very different takes about it. And the way I've set it up with the transcripts is almost like you're going to get all sides of it in a really interesting way, because it both had a lot of good insights about what that was all about. Scott took the point that he didn't like to take the point, but he had the feeling that that Trump was silent because he was bought off. And then Mercouris said, well, no, maybe Trump is being silent because he's learned from the last transition from 2016 into 2017, when the Michael Flynn scandal happened. How it would be better to stay silent because so many people in the government wants to repeat Russiagate with him. So they're being silent and careful, very careful now not to do that. If they're talking to the Russians, they're just talking to the Russians only about setting up when he's president, which they can do legally, the transition team, not talk about substance of the meeting, but set up a meeting with Vladimir Putin or Lavrov, the foreign minister, with the president. Um, so I'm seeing, rather hopeful that there are signs that there is, and about Gorka, who really caused a real stink when he made these. I don't know. This guy, he's like this. He's Hungarian British. By the way, he's a British agent. That's he's like one of the special advisors to the president. But he does a lot of Fox, but he has this stuffy nose, stuffy quality. I get a little scorpionic with him with my put downs, but he ended up saying, well, I think I can tell you one thing that the president told me, that about Putin. He says that he's saying, though, well, this colonel of the KGB, this thug, you are going to listen, and if you don't follow what we say about Ukraine, the amount of weapons that we've sent to Ukraine will be peanuts to what we send after. And, just like such an insult. I've got to, I have some nice pictures where I kind of compare him, this British fellow, this stuffy British fellow, I compare him to one of my favorite horror films from the 1960s, kind of the English Godzilla called Gorgo. So I call Sebastian Gorgo. And I have all these film stills. This is not a Sebastian Gorgo destroying the Tower Bridge in London. And I have a shot of him. I said, "Here's Gorgo. He's talking to a bunch of youth in this certain special neocon situation. But don't worry, he's not about to eat them. These men, these young men and women." So, um, you know, I ended it with saying, Sebastian Gorka was fired by Trump once. just like in The Celebrity Apprentice, you know, people come back to get fired each season again. And I predicted that, yeah, I don't quite know why he's there. And I'm still seeing that Trump will get an education, not from his own advisors, but when he starts talking to Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, and with Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, he'll get an education. He'll have to channel them when he's face to face, and he'll come out of it, I hope, with his eyes opened about to what extent the deep state is not informing their leaders of reality. Now, Tucker Carlson did a wonderful thing where he last year he did 2 hours with Putin, and I thought, you know, all these years that I've been trying to explain how Vladimir Putin really is, because I've been watching him since the turn of the century and studying him very carefully, reading his correctly translated by the Kremlin, his English speeches, or with Kremlin people who are speaking while he's speaking. And to the extent that his speeches and his statements have been turned into something else is something I have watched for over 20 years. So here with Tucker Carlson, and it was good Tucker came in kind of wide open, innocent, kind of naive American. That was exactly the way he should come into this thing and ask those questions that people ask in our media. And then, you know, he had suddenly in 2 hours, any of the billion people that watched that on X, they came out of that with, wow, Putin's not a nut job. Putin's not some Dr. Evil. He's a rational human being, full of restraint, uh, uh, polite, using his knowledge, not his emotions, to explain things. Although he's a man of great deep passion. And the other one, which just happened just recently, last week, Tucker Carlson interviewed the other giant in the Russian government, Sergei Lavrov, which I have been following since the early 1990s when he was the ambassador to the United Nations for Russia. Um, Probably one of the greatest diplomats in human history. And he has a very calm way of dealing with it, a bit of sense of humor. Um, he's a person who said, look, diplomacy is about forging conversations with people, you know, and you get to know people, make it human, you know, you talk about your family, you talk about your kids, things like that. Things like a lot of our electors used to do. See, one of the disadvantages of having airlines and quick flight and all this, there used to be a situation where the Congress, House, and the Senate didn't travel out of Washington. The only people they had time to interact with as a community were their opposites and their families across the aisle in the House of Representatives and the Senate. And what happened in the 50s and the 60s is people people would have their fights, like Reagan and the guy who was the Speaker of the House during Ronald Reagan's period. They were deep good friends, but they would fight, you know, tooth and nail. Reagan, a couple of Irishmen, you know, they're English Irish people, and they fight. And then when it was time 6 o'clock, it's like, let's go out and have a beer. Let's go to the barbecue, and they just leave all that and be friends. But they don't know, Mr. President. No, I won't. And ding, ding, ding. Oh, there's the alarm. Okay, time to just be human again. But that changed when air flight allowed, and the pressures of the Congress having to get money for, they work more to get the money to get the next 2 years in the Congress. They were able to, they don't stay in Washington that long, and they never forge personal relationships with the people on the other side. And that, more than anything else, has caused the polarity in our Congress. I would almost try to make it a situation where, try to bring it back to where you don't go out all that, don't live elsewhere and just come in for a few days in Washington. You got to stay, you know, you got to stay there for a while, you know, and reforge relationships. I would even talk about it, you know, that the people that are there, our representatives, if they're going to be for the people, then they got to that means they're for the community of Americans. That means they too whether they're Republicans, Democrats, Greens, or whatever, they too need to create community with the people that they're arguing and discussing and working over how to govern this country for the people of and by the people. So, anybody biting? Anybody want to ask a question?
But yeah, I mean, the ones that are listening on Spaces, X Spaces, please just request to ask a question, and I'll let you online here live with John, and he'll answer your question. But we did have someone that typed a question.
Oh, okay. Let's do
And,
that.
yeah, let's see. Let's see. Does John have any dates he thinks may be important as flashpoints or turning points?
Well, the first thing that comes to first thing, thank you for asking and typing that in. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is the 20th of January. That's a very important date. The other important date is the 28th of January, because that is the day that the Iranian president will sign with the Russian president a military alliance with the Russian Federation and Iran. So this kind of leads a little into the second part where I'm going to talk about what's just happened, another crisis, which has lasted 2 weeks. And it's kind of come to its this invasion from Idlib province into the Assad-controlled part of Syria. Um, uh, basically, it's a move. Basically, it's a move to it's got all kinds of denizens of the deep involved in politics from many countries involved. You have and it's been a plan for a while because what had happened is the 11-year civil war, the Dirty War, as it's called, which killed 700,000 Syrians and displaced 20 million Syrians. It started in 2011 and it was frozen when ISIS was destroyed, the Islamic State. It was turned into a frozen conflict in 2020, 2019, 2020. But what had happened is that the Idlib was protected by Turkey and by Erdogan, the president of Turkey. And the Kurds, the Syrian Kurds took the northeastern part and controlled it, along with being vassals of the United States, who then controlled all the oil fields in Syria, which are in that area, as well as the breadbasket of Syria. So the Syrians, Syria was ruined. All its cities were destroyed in this civil war. It was devastated. And all the displacement of people, all the nearly 700,000 people that were killed. Um, the so they're not getting their bread, they're not getting the financing to be able to rebuild their country. But as I was just listening to Alexander Mercouris today, he made a very interesting insight that his view is it's not enough to say, okay, Syria didn't have this means to reconstruct, because he made me aware of, I was not aware of this, that the Russians, when they came in to help Syria, because they've been allies since 1956, and they didn't force themselves upon it. They decided to help their ally, and that's why they applied, they were the means that prevented the Islamic State from taking all of Syria during that civil war. But they also offered to to Bashar al-Assad, the president, to allow Russia to invest into Syria, to invest into it for its tourist possibilities, because a lot of Russians are Orthodox Christians that would love to come and be there in pilgrimages. Aramaic, there are villages outside of Damascus that still speak Aramaic, which was the language of Jesus Christ. And when the ISIS people were coming, they wanted to eradicate that. They wanted to expel or destroy all the Christians and their churches in this very multicultural, multi-religious, faith-oriented, rich culture, the ancient culture of the Syrian people. So, but Hafiz al-Assad said no to that. Not only did he say no to that, he also said no to the Chinese also helping. So there was ways that he was just not taking the options. The other thing he didn't do is it's not easy to talk to the president of Turkey. He is Erdogan. Some people consider him a dangerous snake. You know, he plays off everybody. But in a way, it's understandable why he has to play off everybody because there's only two countries on the planet that have this unique geographical location. That means they're always playing off the East against the West against the East. The two nations that do that are the Russian Federation, which spreads across Europe into Asia, and Turkey. It also is a borderland between the two continental cultures. So so I understand that's happening. He's also a fundamentalist and also has desires, Erdogan, to renew the Sultanate, with him being the first one to actually renew and resurrect the Ottoman Empire in a modern sense. You know, what's not known is that the largest city of Syria, as we've known it, actually used to belong before the Ottoman Empire was destroyed in 1917, 18, used to be a part of the heartland of Turkey. So there's so had been Idlib province, and so the war was frozen with all the jihadists all crowding into Idlib, which is adjacent to Aleppo, which had survived years of battle between the jihadists and the Syrian Arab army. But it never fell, although it was much devastated. Um, so So it's that later date in January is very important for this reason. The it's been long planned by Erdogan, and it's now all hatched out with what had happened. That happened on the same day of the famous phone call of Gerasimov to Brown. It's like the Biden people, that front of making a mess for Trump to deal with in his inauguration, that failed with the Ukrainian missile crisis. Now they pushed the button on something they had been planning in the administration to destroy Assad's regime. And why would they do it? Well, they're not alone. It'd be the Biden administration. Netanyahu and Israel was very much involved with Mossad with it. Um, Even during the Civil War, many of the Salafist jihadist organizations that were fighting the Assad presidency were were aided and abetted by the Israeli forces. When they had wounded, Israel brought them in to be healed, gave them weapons. And I guess it's paid off in a few moments, I'll explain why all of that's paid off for their plans. Um, so the problem has always been strategically for Israel that it is also, like Russia, waging a proxy war with the Lebanese Hezbollah organization, which is Iran's way to deter Israel from attacking Iran by keeping Israel busy with Hezbollah on its northern border, with the ability to fire missiles and stop Israeli forces as they effectively did in 2006. And by the way, they did it even more so in 2024 when the war got hot in Lebanon and Hezbollah. But what Israel did is effectively decapitate the long-standing leadership of Sayed Nasrallah. And yes, it's true that leaders in these areas are often assassinated and destroyed by Israel, and they usually have backups. But you know, if you lose your George Washington, your father of your Hezbollah people, if you lose somebody of the stature, you can't make great men. They're rare, so the replacements are doing their best, but they're not George Washington. They're not Abraham Lincoln. Andrew Johnson, who took over from the assassinated Abraham Lincoln, was no Abraham Lincoln. They'll go through the motions, they'll do all the things, but that extra quality of a great man or a great woman is missing. And so Hezbollah has been harmed by that detonation of all those heavy bombs that dug out an entire underground base where Nasrallah was in the southern suburbs of Beirut. But the Hezbollah people bloodied the Israeli armed forces even worse than they did in 2006. And so it's an interesting moment around the time of that call from Gerasimov and when things were shifting in Ukraine. Out of the blue, Netanyahu is just fine signing off on a ceasefire. You know, when it was like he was just fighting forever not to do a ceasefire. Let's have a ceasefire of 3 months with Hezbollah. Ceasefire happens a few days after. A large force of 15,000 Syrian, the Free Syrian Army with HTS, that is Harat Tahrir al-Sham, which is an Arabic name for what used to be al-Nusra, which used to be Al-Qaeda. So these people were trained by CIA and also by the Turks who armed them and trained them as well with American weapons that were given in the stockpiles of the United States that Turkey has one of the, after the United States, is the second largest army in NATO, and a good army. So what happened is that out of Idlib came this force full of new tanks, full of armored personnel carriers, and droves of technicals. Those are trucks that are mounted with recoilless rifle cannons, machine guns, and rocket launchers, and if not, then just crowded full of heavily armed jihadist troops, many of which in both armies, TDS and the Syrian army, freedom fighting army, have badges on their uniforms of the flag of ISIS. You know, the black flag with the white lettering. I saw a lot of pictures of it. They're basically what's left of ISIS and what has survived the Syrian civil war as Al-Qaeda are very much emblazoned with the icons and the things that shows that they're really a reincarnation of the same thing, as is Abu Muhammad Joden. I can't remember his final. I'm just freshly getting immersed in all this stuff in the last few days. But he is the leader of these people, and he is trying to put himself out as a kind of more progressive beheader of Christians and other people that are not stringently following the Wahhabist form of Islam, which many sects of Islam, including the Sunni majority where Wahhabism comes from, they believe of the 5 virtues that a Muslim must perform, that because Wahhabists do not believe in avoiding killing civilians in a jihad, a holy struggle, a holy war, that is considered haram, is considered blasphemy by most other mainstream Muslim communities. So go ahead. Yes, we have somebody.
Yeah, we have another question. Someone typed in, where will be the home of Syrian culture after the fall of Syria, or will it be erased in future history?
God, this is the very question. Thank you for the question. This is the very question I've been struggling with and I will just continue, just hold on a moment, and I will kind of answer that very soon, because what basically has happened is this jihadist army came out of Idlib, and it was initially attacked by the Russian Air Force that is based in Tartus on the coastline, where many of the Alawite Shia live in peace with the largest majority of Christians, Syrians. There's a lot of Christians in Syria, Nestorian Christians, all kinds of Christians. It was through Syrian Christians, the Nestorian Christians, that Muhammad was educated in the New Testament when he was a camel driver. And so a lot of what he says in the Quran is because he was taught by Christians of these things about the New Testament. Um, so what has happened is the the Syrian army did not flee from Aleppo. It did not flee that later when they advanced south towards Damascus against Hama, the city. They did not flee when they did not a third time they'd make their stand at the strategic city of Homs. Why it's strategic is it's that conduit to the east, to the west, where all the coastal people I just talked about, and the Russians, and the source in the suffering country of any import of energy, fuel, products. And if Homs was taken, that would cut off, that would split Assad's Syria into two parts. The Russians on the opposite part, and disconnect them from the fuel and the things that literally keep this teetering Syrian society going. So they didn't make their stand there either. And what it's coming out to see is they were ordered by their generals not to fight. Strangely enough, the Russians, after killing thousands of these jihadists in the initial stages of the invasion on Aleppo from the air, I watched it. It was devastating. If after a while the Russians say, well, if the Syrians are not going to fight, and we're not going to replace them. We came here, when we first came here, we fought alongside the Syrian army because they were fighting for their lives in the Syrian civil war. But here's what happened. Another mistake that Alexander Mercurius pointed out, that al-Assad had when the war was frozen, not over, rather than keep his seasoned, battle-hardened army together, he started retiring the officers, all the experienced officers, and replacing them in the next 5 years with people that he thought were more loyal to him, but not as experienced. And what has happened in a society that's nearly on the brink of collapsing after 5 years of frozen conflict not ended, is that corruption has eaten away into the Syrian government and into the Syrian culture. And there's some news, I don't know if it's true, but it may very well be, that Abu Muhammad of the HTS bribed the Syrian generals to order their troops not to fight, and the Syrians would follow orders. And so that they would just open the whole thing, and then just yesterday, even Damascus fell. While they were coming from the north, all the Israeli taken care of jihadists were advancing north from the south end of Syria to hit Damascus from behind. And now, in what Netanyahu has done, and it's ongoing, he has made a major move of the Israeli IDF forces into Baghdad to create a buffer, but it's really to gain more territory for the dream of Eretz Israel. It is his Lebensraum move, and he's taking a whole lot of territory right up to Baghdad. Um, and he's going to keep it. So, and they'll call it where it's a buffer zone. So the it is very concerning to answer your question about where does the rich Christian history and culture of Syria go. I'm as concerned as Kevork Almazian, who's the go-to guy, as he's an Armenian Syrian citizen living in Germany now. And he's one of the best sources I have talking about what's literally going on the ground. So if you type him in and X, you'll find him. He's very good. Um, and so he has been so the danger is we have this the question is what's going to happen with these people right now. I've seen there's a lot of fires in Damascus. The Israelis have been targeting strategic things like the science department where they want to wipe out any possible chemical weapons that are being used there, so they blew that up today. So actually Damascus got a lot of fires right now from Israeli airstrikes. And the problem is that and I don't know if the Russians are going to stay. I mean, the Abu Muhammad has agreed, they've been in talks with them, and that they're not going to attack the bases, the Russian bases. But I really don't see where the Russians will remain. And the question then is what happens to the Alawites and the Christians that are on the western coast there? I mean, if Syria does not want to fight for itself, then the Russians are really already cause a lot of tensions for Putin, that the Russians were not for him putting, not a lot of Russians there. It's only an expedition force of 5,000 men, but and the Air Force there. But um, so then again, that gets me back. So it's very, I mean, these are a period of, I mean, what's happened in 2 weeks is Syria has collapsed. Syria, and it collapsed finally in the last 36 hours. It just collapsed. The Assad regime is over. They did get out. They were not shot down. Maybe that was another plane of escaping government officials that was shot down or over Homs on his way to the Russian base. But he and his family are in, and his government members are in exile in Moscow right now. But I don't think Vladimir Putin's going to ever talk to him again, because the decisions that Hafez al-Assad, who is a very brave man, he was brave throughout the 11 years of the Civil War. He when it really thought he was not going to make it, he made it. So he's a tragic hero, as Alexander Macaris, from being a Greek, will say. He's a tragic hero. He did great things, but also his pride and his mistakes have made him a tragic figure. And the House Assad has fallen. It had been in power since 1970 with Hafez al-Assad, his father. And so we're talking about, over 50, half a century, they have been running Syria, and they're gone now. So the so it's very possible that Palmyra's ruins will be once again desecrated. That because they're Christian, the idol, their statues, so all the statues will be destroyed. It's possible that the Christian communities outside of Baghdad that I was talking about that speak the language of Christ, they may be eradicated. Um, there's also going to be a great flood again into Europe of people leaving Syria. And this will also mean a lot of terrorists also going to Europe. The way Syria is now. I mean, the Turkish president wants to get all the millions of people in camps out of Turkey and go back into Syria, but actually all of them can't go back to Syria in the state that it's in. So I've also heard that the Turkish army is attacked I don't know if this is just, I don't know yet, but I'm hearing word that the Turkish army attacked the northeastern um, Kurdish area with the Turkish army fighting the Kurds across that area. So, um, what's probably going to happen, and Trump is probably all for it, is that the Americans will be squeezed out of that area. Trump's sick, and he doesn't want to be in these wars anymore. Um, and that's a good thing. Too many forever wars. It's not for us that these wars are being fought. It's for the military industrial complex to make money off of suffering, chaos, and hell. Such an evil thing that a business of evil is what our military industrial complex has become. And that's going to be tapered down too, because there's nothing more wasteful in the US government than the military industrial complex. Um, there's a, and which has not been able to be audited, has lost trillions of dollars that they can't account for. That's got to end. So, because it's impoverishing us, our bridges are crumbling, our hospitals don't work. You know, let the rest of the world work out their own problems for a change. It's time for us to stop being Atlas, holding up the sphere of the earth, deciding that it needs a policeman, even though the earth and its people never asked us to be their policeman. And it's a tiresome thing to do. And when poor Atlas United States drops that hegemonic globe, it's going to, after a bit of a shock, it's going to be a much nicer place to live in this country when we are not burdened with empire. We'll become America again. And somebody else has asked something.
Yeah, it's a kind of a related question, kind of dovetails into what you're saying. How involved is the US government in this conflict, and what is the strategic impact
Oh,
on
good.
Russians' territorial integrity?
Well, okay, first thing is this is a global war that's being fought, but it's not just being fought against the Russians. It is the America is really waging war against the rise of the global majority, which is guided by the BRICS alliance. It's a new world order contrary to the Western rules-based order, which is multipolar, not unipolar. The unipolar world is over. So the United States is trying to preserve, as empires do, and usually hasten their destruction by trying to hold on to everything that the empire has in control. The situation is that Russia, how that has risen again after the devastation of the Soviet Union's collapse, has now become once again a major world power, and it's now the fourth largest economy in the world. It's not a gas station with 11 time zones, ladies and gentlemen. It is a viable. It is the Saudi Arabia of commodities. It's where all the resources, many of the resources are. It is a country to be respected and dealt with seriously, not childishly. So we're looking at an axis situation of where the core BRICS nations that are also have the largest nuclear arsenals if they're united, China and Russia, and the largest militaries at this moment, Russia being the now uh, very large army, growing, is not suffering 600,000 casualties. Trump is buying into probably Gorka's Gorgo moments with that idea. It is the Ukrainians that are losing. I would imagine now, I'm not even counting anymore. So many people getting lost. It's probably around 700,000 dead. And the Russians have lost 10 times less, but they've lost a lot more people than we lost and got killed in Vietnam. In 10 years, they've passed that in two. So we're talking about at least 60,000 dead Russians, 120,000 wounded, a million wounded, injured Ukrainians, and 700,000 dead. But that's another story. To not get off the track of this question. Um, So the Russian integrity of its border is the very reason why Russia has been forced to go to war in Ukraine, because what has happened since 1990, when the promise was made in the Bush senior administration with Gorbachev that if Gorbachev allowed it in the Cold War's ending, that Germany could reunite, a big thing for Russians to agree to, because the last time Germany was united, they lost 27.5 million people. So it was a big thing for him to say, but he said yes. And then Baker, who was Secretary of State, still alive, still tell people this is what really happened, said, well, we pledge then not to step one step further east from Germany. We will not encroach and take up the Warsaw Pact states into NATO. That was the Warsaw Pact was the counterbalance to NATO in the first Cold War, 1948 to 1989. So what then happened is the Bill Clinton administration ignored this, and I must blame Gorbachev for not getting it as a treaty in writing. He did not, even though it is in writing, but not as official treaty. When people said for decades, "Oh, there's no record that that happened," oh yes, there is. But I've even posted it on my Hogue prophecy reports. But it's not a treaty. Gorbachev was a very gullible, naive man, and he meant well, but he was kind of weak and kind of he's loved by the American government because he didn't see the carpetbaggers coming, like in the South, trying to strip Russia of all these resources. He was a good man, but he was a very gullible man. So what happened then is over the next 30 years, NATO expanded. And each time it added a new country, it added a new army, a new force. And it expanded all the way up to the Russian borders near Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania. And so by 2007, Vladimir Putin finally got very public with his warnings, and he went to the Munich Security Conference in Munich, Germany, with all the neocons and everybody there. And you can watch the speech. It's an important speech. Your future is shaped by it. He said, basically, you know, you made this promise, but you broke it, and you have been advancing, and you say you're a defensive organization, but this seems like all you're doing is what Hitler did with his Axis forces advancing to do maneuvers in front of the Soviet territories, and then suddenly launches 3 million people in June 22nd, 1941, Operation Barbarossa. And so the Russians saying, well, you're kind of doing the same things again. And so Putin was there to say to them that we have our red lines. And if you seek to make Ukraine part of NATO and Georgia, the Republic of Georgia, those are our red lines. And then we will have to respond with all options, including military. Now, why is that? The most important one is, I mean, Georgia, they tested what he threatened the following year in August when NATO actually was training the army to make an attack on South Ossetia and start the Six-Day War. The Russian army responded and destroyed the Georgian army that NATO had created for it. And then they cut off the oil for about 2 days, occupied the area for 2 days, cutting off the oil from Baku to Europe to make the point, we can cut it off again. But they turned it on again and went back into their own areas. The reason why Ukraine, here's the simplest way I can explain to you how the territorial integrity, also the airspace of Russia is threatened, exactly like what the Soviet Union did in 1962 by putting missiles into Cuba. That was like what NATO will do if NATO gets Ukraine to join. You will have missiles on the border, northern border of Ukraine with Russia, which are less than 4 or 5 minutes, if they're launched, from decapitating Moscow. Exactly the same amount of time that the missiles in Cuba could decapitate Washington, D.C. John F. Kennedy, the president then, was not a warmonger, but he was definitely ready and preparing to go and invade Cuba because this situation in Cuba was an existential threat to the United States. As threatening, I mean, they were saying if these missiles were launched, we could lose 8 million people in 5 minutes. And the government would be decapitated. There would be no time to move anybody. Well, Russia's in exactly the same situation with Ukraine, with NATO trying to get Ukraine to be a part of it. This has crossed the line. And the whole nation of Russia sees this as an equal threat to Napoleon invading Russia, to Hitler invading Russia, because you are not hearing it, but these leaders in the EU and NATO are sometimes openly talking about breaking up Russia. Kaja Kallas, the person who's the kind of foreign minister of the EU right now, I think it's that lady. She's from Latvia, where they still celebrate the SS commandos and the SS people that murdered all the Jews in Latvia in a special Remembrance Day. They have no problem. They're all dressed in Nazi uniforms and stuff. Well, Kaja Kallas openly started talking about how we should break up Russia. It's too big, and we should separate its people and take its resources. She's dumb enough to just openly talk about it like a childish idiot. And she is the foreign minister of the EU now. You won't hear that. You won't hear that in CNN or Fox or these mediums, but you will hear it on the real news, so I contend. Um, so these things, so Russia, so Ukraine joining NATO means that NATO will have the ability to take out Russian government, 20 million Russians in 5 minutes. How can you blame them? How can you blame them for not, if the Cuban Missile Crisis hadn't gone the way it went, on my birthday, the invasion, the bombardment by air, taking Cuba back to the Stone Age would have begun on my birthday. A few days later, U.S. vessels that were converging on Cuba would have invaded. What no one knew in the Kremlin or in Washington was that somebody in Soviet command structure had given Frog tactical nuclear weapon batteries on the beaches in Cuba the ability of colonel or battalion commander to launch upon the U.S. boats coming in and the ships that were disembarking those troops with nuclear weapons. The fleet would have been melted down. We would have struck back with something else. The Soviet Union would have taken Berlin. We fire our missiles. They fire us, and none of you would be alive to hear this warning. This country would have been a cinder. The Soviet Union and the United States would have started a nuclear winter, which would have killed 3/4 of the human race. Maybe Australia could grow some crops and New Zealand could grow some crops. But the pall, this ash kind of pall of all that blast effect, throwing up all that radioactive dust and smoke and fire debris, would have made the sunshine, even down in the best areas in the southern hemisphere, as bright as a full moon. The sun, as bright as a full moon, cannot grow crops. Nostradamus said after this war of the dreadful globes that would be fired by fleets flying over cities, the fire of the cities good for their navigation. And the globes are the spherical device of the fission trigger that destroys an atomic, that implodes all around a fissile material hydrogen bomb. And he talked about at sunrise, the great fire would approach from the south and slowly move over the world. And if you understand nuclear weaponry, the first things that hit in Russia and hit in America are the southernmost. Moreover, Russia now has the Sarmat 2 and the Vanguard and other systems that are actually hypersonic. They fire south. They travel within 15 minutes over the South Pole and come up at Mach 27, 27 times the speed of sound. They come up from the south, fire from the south. They come up from the south where the nuclear weaponry and radar systems of the United States is pointed to a polar attack. But it doesn't matter because the Sarmat can glide around the radar signals and you can't find it. It's too fast. It launches 10 MIRV warheads, also maneuverable, that could have a yield of 700,000 kilotons or 1 megaton. And there are 400 of them, of those MIRV weapons already stationed. I have a book here that I think is a very important book, and I highly recommend you read this book by Anne Jacobson. It is a fictional, hypothetical look at what a nuclear war would look like, how it would start, what it would do. It basically, a nuclear exchange would last 72 minutes. And it's a hard read, this, but I think anyone who's listening, get this book. And it is Nuclear War, a Scenario.
Yeah, I listened to the audiobook of that, and it was kind of like shocking as it's
Yeah,
doing the countdown from
yeah,
the missile launch to when the actual impact. And
yeah,
it's written in a uh, uh, a timeline,
yeah.
and what our how our government reacts at certain points.
It triggers an automatic
Right,
response.
right,
Yeah,
and
it's
and
already programmed.
it's
It's already there to launch itself.
right. It's scary. It's scary,
It
and not
takes the
only
human
that,
element out of
what
it.
she brings up in the book, she brings up a book that they don't really run through a simulation with the president. They
No,
they kind of inform verbally what it would be like, but they don't run through the simulation. So the president can never really understand all of these little milestones that take place in the decision before launching.
yeah,
Because sometimes, if you're a little bit more experienced through something in your life, if you had a chance to redo it, I would go right instead of left,
yeah, right.
or right, because of experience. That's what experience
Yeah.
is. But they don't want the president to be
No,
experienced in a simulation of this, because then the president's going to start asking questions. Well, wait a minute, why is it this way?
yeah.
Because the deep state, this national security state, wants control. They want control of the decision making and of the
Yeah, so that's why we got to get
continuity
these
of
people
government.
out. That's why these people have to be
Yeah.
fired because they're literally going to kill us and all life on this planet. And they're too dumb to understand that. They're
So there's another question here. So same person is asking the question.
oh, good.
And for the ones that are listening on X Spaces, you can also just request to go on voice here, and
Hmm.
you can ask John your question uh, directly. But the typed question here is: please give your thoughts on the idea that Putin is envisioning a resurrection of a Russian empire by his military incursion into Ukraine.
Well, I've kind of just answered that. The only reason why Putin is in Ukraine and the Russians are in Ukraine is that they're doing the opposite The this is why see, I've been on Russian television. I've experienced if you look in Russia, there's a lot more argument and discussion on Telegram chat. Just get on Telegram in Russia. Just start listening and then use a translator thing so you can listen to what they're saying. There, there's a lot more democracy going on in Russia than we have at all with our media. Um, when I go on Russia and when I criticize Putin, they don't censor me. I'm constantly censored in Western media, and I've been involved in Western media since 1987, doing over 300 documentaries in 4 continents, tens of thousands of radio shows. Um, I've seen it evolve, and I've seen actually the United States become more like the Soviet Union. And what I've also seen is Sture Johansson's prophecy at the end of the Cold War II, one. Um, he predicted that America would become more like the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union becoming Russia would become more like America, more democratic, more open, more discussions, things happening. And that is my experience of Russia, because I don't stay in the bubble of CNN, the legacy media, Fox, and all these people who are just projecting the consider this point. I love your question because it's an important question. It's a question a lot of Americans ask. What is the empire goals of? Is Russia trying to create a new Russian empire? Um, well, when the Nazis took over Kiev, um, this civil war started with Russian-speaking populations in Ukraine. The 2 times Vladimir Putin and the Russians tried to negotiate a settlement that would keep Ukraine all ones together, but would allow Eastern and Western Ukrainians more autonomy, the oblasts, the provinces, that if the Western ones want to relate more to European industries and stuff, fine. Let the Eastern ones relate more to Russians because they're Russians. No problem. But the both Minsk one and two agreements that put a stop to the lot of violence twice to end the civil war were supposed to be guaranteed by Angela Merkel and President Hollande of France. And what it came out after Russia had to finally save the Donbass people from an invasion that was about to be planned for March 10th, 2022, by the NATO trained forces of 360,000 Ukrainians on the border of the Donbass, Lugansk, and Donetsk provinces of Ukraine, which they were shelling. They were getting ready to ethnically cleanse those places out. The Russians intervened because they felt, we have to protect Russians because we are Russians. And if they're being persecuted and massacred and set on fire in buildings in Odessa, like was happening, you just go to my archives at hogueprophecy.com archives, and you will see the footage. Um, this they did not want to do this war, but they any more than we wanted to, and American people wanted to invade Cuba. But if you put the missiles there, you got a war, existential threat. So what ended up happening is Hollande and Merkel, former Chancellor of Germany, both admitted that all they were doing with Minsk 1 and 2 was not guaranteeing it would be brought out, but buying time for NATO to train the Ukrainian army and forces to attack Russia. And so they were lying to the Russians and lying about help bringing a negotiated peace. So, I mean, one of the best people to watch in Russian TV is he's kind of the Tucker Carlson of Russia. His name is Sluhoviev, and he lived in Alabama and speaks fluent uh, American, American, fluent English. I also watched him listening to Assad in an interview recently, and he apparently speaks fluent or understands Arabic as well. Um, anyway, he speaks really good English, and he said a simple mathematical issue. He said, why do people think that we are going to want to, how we even could occupy Europe? Europe is 600 million people. We have less than 150 million people in Russia. There is no way mathematically that we'd even want, let alone could, occupy and control such a vast area with so many people. You know, practical Russian. What are you guys talking about? Um, and then I'd ask you this in history. Name me any time in European history that Russia unilaterally decided to invade and conquer Europe. Now, they have been allied with other European kings to fight Napoleon in 8 coalitions, but they were part of a European alliance. I'm talking about what has there ever been a situation like Napoleon invading Russia and Hitler invading Russia that the Russians did to Europe? No, it's all one-sided. It's been going on since 1242 when the Teutonic Knights invaded Pskov and Novgorod, and the invasions have been coming ever since. Um, the Russians have no designs on Europe. Now, the reason why they were in Eastern Europe was because in the Cold War was because it became a Cold War. It didn't have to become a Cold War. And President Truman is probably more responsible for that because of his arrogant ignorance of the situation that created this situation. But it was a burden to the Russians. And frankly, remember, the Cold War was not won by us. The Russians got sick and tired of fighting it. They just got, because the burden of having all those European, Eastern European nations and all was just, they couldn't handle it anymore. So Gorbachev said to Reagan and Bush Sr., Vice President, he said, I'm going to take your enemy away from you. We just decide, we decide not to fight this Cold War anymore. Now, what happened is the privatization that Gorbachev started to do with perestroika and glasnost was hastened the collapse of a system that could not take that change so rapidly. That was an implosion of the Soviet Union. We had nothing to do with it. Now, the Americans could afford to fight the Cold War, but the Russians couldn't. So they stopped. That is not a victory. That is a decision that I'm just not going to fight you anymore. You didn't knock me on the ground with a nuclear war, and I didn't knock you on the ground. I just got out of the ring and made peace. So, the one of the greatest lies that the Western world is preaching to its people is that Russia is a threat to invade it. Again, show me where they've ever done it. I mean, there's one interesting story where it's the end of the war. Russia has lost 27.5 million people, 18,000 cities destroyed, 70,000 villages eradicated. They are on their knees, even though they won. And some of the generals came to Stalin after the war and said, "Hey, wouldn't this be a time to finish this problem once and for all? These Europeans constantly invading us. They nearly killed us this last time. Maybe we should just take them." This again are military people, and that is why civilian leaders should run countries and not generals like Ernest LeMay, who wanted to bomb Cuba and bomb the Soviet Union, thought we could win the war. And Kennedy, was watching this guy, and when he'd get out of the place, he'd just shake his head. And this guy's a nut. Well, unfortunately, in our country, a lot of the generals are just like Ernest LeMay, like that guy Buchanan, General Buchanan, who said before NATO very publicly when this problem with the missile, Ukraine missile crisis started, he pulled a LeMay. He made a statement. I have the quote. I'm just remembering in paraphrase, but he made the statement is, and he was very glib about it. We are ready. We are ready to launch a nuclear exchange against Russia, and we are confident that we will have little damage from it. He just basically, it's not exactly, this is a drift of what he was saying. Um, that was shocking. That man should be fired. He should be, uh, he was speaking off the cuff. He was not speaking from what the president wanted. But then again, the Biden administration has been kind of a leaderless presidency for many years now. Um, so any idiot can get up and say something in the name of the presidency. Um, so basically um, I hate to say this, but and I've been in journalism a long time, but what I'm experiencing about mainstream media is whatever they say, consider it a projection of what they want, of what they think Russia's doing. And if they're saying the Russians are losing 600,000 men and they're tired and they're exhausted, why have they, why are they having, they don't have to call draft. They're getting 30,000 people a month volunteering. I have seen since this war start, the Russian army has built itself. When it started, it had 125,000 people invading Ukraine. Now there's a million, and most of them were trained and created in the last 2 years. Um, yeah, so what you hear in the Western legacy media is usually opposite of what's really going on. But you do have a source to check whether I'm full of it or not, and that is X and the alternative media, which I'm a gatekeeper, a doorway. I know it's not gatekeeper, I'm a gate opener. So if you go to Hogue Prophecy, you'll see that. And so, do we have another question?
Yeah, the questions are starting to come in. I
Oh,
just
good.
wanted, just to remind everybody that don't be afraid to request to uh, turn on your mic and to ask a question verbally. But we're going to switch uh, the country here. They're asking for what's the fate of Canada, and it's tied to what's going on in Ukraine. You know the story about the liberals banning hundreds of types, hundreds more types of firearms, and then sending those prohibited guns to Ukraine. So, what do you think is really the fate of Canada because of the arms shipments? But they want to disarm their citizens
Yeah.
and take those weapons and send it to Ukraine.
As if a hunting rifle is going to help Ukraine. He might be able to shoot down a drone with it. I know the Russians are using hunting rifles, scat guns, to shoot down Ukrainian drones, but I mean, it's kind of pathetic. But yeah, well, I mean, Canada, I always thought that if things got too bad in the United States, that I could always count on the democracy of Canada to be fair with me and become an expatriate and become a Canadian if I had to. But then I saw what right around when the war started, then I saw what happened to the truckers who just wanted to get Trudeau's attention and discuss the issue of some of the limits that he was putting on their trucking through the certain thing that happened with the 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 coup, that the sequestering that happened in 2020, if you get my drift. Um, that was what the discretion was over, and so they did something that was within their rights to do. They drove their trucks into Ottawa and they lined them up and wanted to. They were protesting. They just wanted to talk to their prime minister. He is their prime minister, and prime minister feigned that he got sick with the coup and hid. Very strange that Castro's bastard son would be so unbrave like Castro. But that's another story. Um, the maybe he takes more after his mother, but which she was a real character, um, a lovely character, but a character. Um, the problem with Ukraine, and I know this from firsthand experience, the problem with Ukraine is it has a Nazi problem. Um, in fact, the deputy prime minister, she is a she is the daughter of Ukrainians. She Ukrainian Nazis, actually. Her grandfather was in Goebbels' propaganda ministry, writing Ukrainian Nazi articles, propaganda. She used to go to outside of Toronto. She used to go and to like the they had the uniforms, all the girls. It was a militarized thing, and they were wearing the Ukrainian uniforms of the OUN, which is a Banderite fascist group. Um, and I came to understand this by accident. When Facebook wasn't shadow banning me, I used to have all these wonderful conversations and debates with people all over the world. But when this Maidan coup happened and then the Civil War happened, I began to send film and things that I saw of what really was going on, and that the fascist problem that the current Ukrainian government has is quite big. The Azov Battalion, Pratli sector, right sector, was the people who created the coup by getting up on the buildings of the Maidan Square and wantonly shooting anybody that moved, friend or foe. And these all guys were all the red and black bandana people of Pratli sector. The red is the blood of the Ukrainian people. The black of the lower tribe, bicolor, is the black earth of Ukraine, which so much blood has gone into of the superior Slavs, the non-Mongolian bred Slavs of Ukraine. Now, so there's a problem there, but the problem was that I was getting all these death threats from people, and threatening my life for showing these things of Nazi involvement in Ukraine, as if Tonya Book and some of the people that ran the Socialist Nationalist Party of Ukraine, which ended up being Svoboda, the fact that um, America uh, picked the who's who of Banderite fascists as the part of the chief cabinet of security and armaments and all of that. I was exposing all that. So I got all these people that were coming in threatening my life and limb. And the thing that was nice about Facebook is that you can go and into their spaces and see who they are and where they live and what they're doing. And I I watched I noticed that they were all rather nationalist, extreme nationalists, Ukrainian Canadians. So I checked it out, and I finally found out that the Ukrainian contingents of the SS were some of the most populous of anybody. In fact, there was a whole division, an SS Grenadier division called Galicia, that fought alongside the SS German forces and also committed a lot of atrocities. In Slovakia and other places, they put down a rebellion in Slovakia, killed a lot of civilians. And the survivors ended the war, 2,000 of the 12,000 ended the war in Italy, moving away from the Russians so they wouldn't be caught. And they went into Italy, where they surrendered to the British. Now, the British allowed them to be, they were surrendering them as being, running away from Nazi tyranny and Soviet tyranny. So they ended up going to Britain. But not long after that, the British had enough of them and they sent them to Canada, where most of those men and their wives were the people who created the grandchildren that live mostly north and around Toronto in the suburbs, who are sending me death threats. so I know firsthand Canada's Nazi problem. I've been threatened by it. I'm also on the Miravorits list that Banderites, Ukrainians created. And guess what? I wonder how they're able to broadcast so easily from far off war-torn Ukraine. The reason is there's a server in Langley, Virginia, in the CIA that helps the Miravorits be broadcast all over our country. Now, there's 80,000 people on the list now, but I was one of the early ones. So now I'm in a crowd, but a lot of my contacts, a lot of my sources, Scott Ritter is on the Miravorits list and others. So it's and Janet Egan, your deputy prime minister, was reared by Banderite fascists. So it didn't, I was wondering, because she was the one that was, he was Trudeau, I call him. Trudeau Bird was hiding out from feigning or possibly getting the coof. So he wouldn't talk to them because he was sick. And so she did all the work. And I was thinking, man, she was vicious. I mean, she was the one that got all the bank accounts, froze all the bank accounts, destroyed these truckers. Um, like the January 6th people are being destroyed, and they haven't even had the right of habeas corpus, which is in our Constitution. They have most of them people are waiting in prison for their trials, just languishing in prison. This is so this is so Soviet Union. So, we uh, Canada's very leadership has been in the deputy prime minister has been influenced. And then finally, there was that terrible snafu where the head of parliament was introducing a war veteran from World War II. And everyone would go, oh, and there's this old guy up there, and he's a war veteran. And then he made the statement, he actually, um, um, he was basically said he fought against the Soviets, he fought against the Russians, and like people were going, oh, and then they kind of went. Some of the more smarter ones with a few more brain cells said, "Oh, well, who who was fighting against the Russians? The Axis, who was fighting? The people allied to the Austrian fellow with the funny Charlie Chaplin mustache." Um, so the guy in there praising him, he's there. And then so what I did is I immediately went to his website. Immediately I saw there was all kinds of paraphernalia from the Galicia division. He's a surviving soldier of the Galicia Ukrainian Nazi division, SS. So they had an SS guy, and what do you say to the 80,000 Canadians that were killed on the beaches of Dieppe, on the beaches of Normandy, and fighting the fascists? And so here's this guy going, and he's like going, at last I'm loved. It's like going, oh, like that. And guess what? It gets worse. You know, Eaglin and those people, when they have somebody come into the chambers, they get vetted. This is what security does. I saw his website in 5 seconds and saw that he was a raging Nazi. Uh, she knew. I don't think she's that stupid. But I also found out that was the second time that he was called up and he got away with that. Makes you want to hope that the conservatives win in the next Canadian elections. I don't know if that's any better, but sometimes I think the world has gone a little too left of center, and we need to come back a little to right of center to kind of get our bearings again. It's I've even written it. It just feels like it's time to do that because the left has gone gaga. Um, and anyway, go ahead, got another one?
So one individual wants to know the Russian counterpart to Tucker Carlson, their name again. They want to write.
Slavoviev is his name. You go to X, um, and Slavoviev. I mean, that'd be, just try to type that in phonetically, Slavoviev, and he probably will show up. Just a second, maybe I can pull him up and spell it out for you. Let me see, where is that? There he is. So I'll check my. Oh, also the other person is that the Armenian Syrian. His name is Kevork Almazian. That is Kevork Almazian, Almassin. He's really a great source for what's going on in Syria. Um, yeah, I think I got him. Let's see. No, that doesn't work. Oh, I know it's wrong. Let's see. Tucker has talked to him, actually. I think he was on Tucker Carlson. Okay, let's try slow. Slow, yeah. Oh well. Well, just email me at talkwithme@hogueprophecy.com. HOGUEPROPHECY.com. Talk with me. That's all. Just one word. And just email me, and then I'll try to find him. He's great. He's funny. Well, he's an interesting guy, just like Tucker.
So, but he speaks in English.
Yes, very well. He had a farm in Alabama, and he
Oh,
lived in America a long
well, this
time.
person also lives in Alabama.
Oh,
Yeah, so maybe they're neighbors. Who knows?
well, no, well, maybe they were, because he's back in Russia
Oh, okay.
for a long, long time. But in his 80s, he was the 70s and the 80s, he was living here. And maybe if I type, let's see if I type it another way. Let's see, Russian. Oops. Okay.
Yeah, I just want to remind the audience, the ones that are going to be watching the recording on the channels, and the ones that are listening on X Spaces, the next show that I do with John in about 2 weeks or so, we're also going to be doing not just the X Spaces call-in where you can ask questions, but we'll be doing a live video feed on my YouTube channel.
Yes, I got him.
Okay, good.
It's Soloviev. That is, he's Jewish Russian, and it's Soloviev. And you'll see a whole bunch of an interesting spread on another really good person on X, which is Simplicius. That's Simplicius. He writes great essays. Is a good source of Russian situation. But yeah, there's a cross section here of Soloviev. Soloviev. There we go. So
That's great. That's great. So we're already 2 hours and 20 minutes in to the show. I just want to remind the audience, make sure you click the link that's in the description box of the videos that I do with John. That link will take you to his website. You'll be able to purchase his periodicals and do a reading. This helps support his work. It's very important to support individuals that are sharing information. John spends a lot of effort in creating original content, so please help support him by clicking the link in the description box of this video and all the videos that I've done with John to go to his website and to purchase his products. So before we go, John, could you just kind of just briefly mention what's in the periodicals and about?
yes, The other thing too, is also would like to say, if you type in John Hogue, Hogue, on Amazon.com, you'll get to see some of my 52 books that are available for sale. And then you can just go to my author page if you hit on John Hogue books, and then there'll be a little link on that, any one of those pages that will send you immediately to the author's page where you'll see a selection of my physical and e-books. So, well, basically, the Hogue Prophecy Report, it roughly comes in at the end of one month and the beginning of another. And it's so this year I will have published about 78 articles for the whole year, and that's more than one a week. And they're fully illustrated. And what I do is I send them as a PDF file on your email. It's a little lower tech than a lot of things, but it's easy. But I do it to protect my free speech and allow me to get my messages out to you. So, it's, I basically look at the trends of the world from a prophetic point of view. That's what I contribute into this as a prophecy scholar, and also somebody who makes accurate forecasts for a long time, all documented. And so you would be it's $5 a month if you do automatic payment. It's um, it's $60 for a single payment. If you go to Hogue Prophecy right now, in the link that he has, it's kind of an archive, so it's a little delayed. It's got stuff from May. Um, but if you go into that, you will find the instructions on how you can join. And actually, Paul has that here in his page as well. So, and so that's one thing I do. The other thing I do is I do private readings. I mean, you can see me as you see me right now. Yeah, well, sorry for the people who are in the audio, but soon that will change next week. You will see me in my office behind me, and this is where I also do one-on-one readings, where um, I take my reading of the world and I take it into giving a reading for you as an individual. So um, that's usually, there's a lot of spaces available for December still before they all flood in. So check it out. What will happen is you'll click on the email there, and that the ad will show. And because I get a ton of email, because I'm wide open, I got it wide open, so I no none of the censors censor for me. So I get hundreds of emails. A lot of it's junk, but so be sure to write Hogue reading on the subject line, because in the flurry of all the snowfall of different mail, I will see that. I'll immediately get back to you as soon as I see it and give you the instructions and the payment instructions, and how and what we do in the reading. Basically, it's about 90 minutes or more. It has an astrological aspect, which you can get a free chart from astro.com, so you don't have to pay more for the chart. And I do a little astrology with the aspectarians as well in it. And then which the Astro.com has a great design for that. It's very easy to read. And then I also will pull out sometimes the Osho Zen Tarot deck, and I will do a very unusual way of doing the Celtic Cross, where if any card in the process of doing the Celtic cross is saying go deeper, I will take that card out and do a whole different Celtic cross on it. And it's like digging with the cards. And then maybe a third time, it doesn't always happen, but sometimes it happens. And then suddenly you get to a third Celtic cross, and it's just like all the stuff is coming together. I don't know how it happens. It's amazing. You get all these cards in front of you. You're spontaneously moving your hands, and suddenly, one theme is just coming out completely in a spread of cards. It's quite miraculous. So anyway, yeah. So those are the things. So I hope you consider it.
Yeah, please, individuals, click the link in the description box of this video, and that will take you to John's website directly. And we're going to be doing this in 2 weeks or so, and we're going to do a live stream in YouTube, and hopefully we'll get a little bit more sophisticated with our our operation here.
Well, they were
But
great
it's a lot of
questions.
buttons to click to do it.
Yeah, well, there were great questions. Thank all of you who were listening and those of you who typed in and gave questions. I love, it's one of my favorite things. Like when I on Coast to Coast, my favorite time on Coast to Coast is doing questions and answers. Actually, I'll be on 31st of December. I will do my predictions for 2025 on Coast from 10 to 12 midnight Pacific.
Great.
That's another place. You can ask me there, but you can always ask me every other week here.
Okay, well,
Oh,
very good. We're gonna wrap it up here, but thank you for the ones that are on X Spaces for listening the whole time and
thank you.
asking your questions. And next time when we do the call in on X Spaces, the next show, you can type it in, but also don't be afraid to just request to have your mic on and ask a question that way. It's a great way to interact. The whole idea that we're trying to build here is this more interaction with the audience.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for listening. So let me close down the spaces before I close down the
Bye,
video.
everybody.
All right. Okay, so let me end this. Okay, and then you got to say bye to everybody on YouTube.
Bye bye, everybody on YouTube. Thank you.
Okay, let me stop the recording here.